Welcome to the Ring Spaces studio in Neil on Business. Neil on Business is a show where we dig deep into the entrepreneurial mindset and try to discover what makes business success, from discipline to disruption. I'm your host, Neil Darling, entrepreneur, father, husband, and straight shooter when it comes to what it really takes to win in business. Each week, I'll plan to sit down with movers and shakers ranging from former Marines, business leaders, bold thinkers, and disruptors who traded uniforms for boardrooms and built successful businesses and brought the attitude and fortitude required for success. If you're looking for real conversations about leadership, grit, and building something that lasts, you're in the right place. Let's get to work. Well. Welcome to Ring Spaces podcast studio with my good friend, Zach Hancock. This is Neil Darling. I'm Neil Darling, and this is Neil on Business. For the record, this is our second take because we screwed up the video. You didn't have anything to do with it. So we're going to streamline our interview this time. But I think your content was fascinating. So hopefully we can get right to this and make it better the second time around. Zach, you are a Ring Spaces customer. You run a small, focused insurance agency. Is that a fair thing to say? Agent?
Yeah, fair thing.
Yep. And we'll talk a little bit about that. Our focus this month is we are focusing on Marines that have become entrepreneurial, and we'd like to hear about the whole journey from the very beginning. So let me see here. You're a very interesting Marine because you did many things. We'll talk a little about 8th and I and your drill team, but you were a human intelligence guy too, and multiple conflict zones, right?
Correct.
Both Iraq and Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm hoping that we can maybe focus a little more on your skills that you used, and maybe, because I'm a salesperson, and maybe we could talk a little bit about the kind of things that you did and maybe how we can apply them for being an entrepreneur and seeing how those skills might relate for not just yourself and your MLS, but also for Marines that are looking to do some things after they get out of the service. So welcome, Zach. Maybe just give us a little brief bio on you. Where are you from?
I'm from the Midwest, from Michigan.
Michigan, where it snows a lot.
Yep. I'm the only one that left my hometown. Everybody else, when you go through school there, you either work agriculture, trades, or work for Dow Chemical or one of its subsidiaries. So
yeah. So Dow Chemical is now. This is not Battle Creek. That's Kellogg's, right, or General Mills. But we're in Michigan.
Different. So Midland, Michigan has the headquarters of Dow, and actually, fun fact: during the Vietnam War, they were partially responsible for the production of napalm and Agent Orange. So
good,
interesting.
Good. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Really, very famous videos with that product and use. So all right, so give us some time frame here. So you were in high school when? When did you graduate?
So early 2000s, no prospect of, going to school academically, sports wise. Yeah. But I knew I wasn't going to actually do anything with it. So
you a football player or
football, baseball, basketball.
Yeah. Okay. So you're athletic.
Pretty traditional. I actually still play baseball.
Yeah. Well, that's good.
But, the goal was to remove myself from the environment that wasn't conducive to anything positive. And for whatever reason, I picked the Marine Corps. Still to this day, when people ask me, I'm like, I have no friggin' idea. Like, it just made sense at the time. And
did you just trek down to the recruiter and kind of go to the 4 or 5 offices and then the Marine?
No, they're pretty smart. So Marine Corps recruiters are like, let's identify who the shitbags are in high school and let's really promise them nothing.
Right.
And, kind of feed off of their ego. And for whatever reason, when I visited all the other services, I'm like, nope, fuck nope. And then when I talked to the Marine Corps, it was just kind of like they had me watch this shitty VHS video, told me I was fat, even though I was in very good shape at the time. And then I was like, all right, screw these guys. I'm going to do it.
So they did a little reverse psychology on it.
They did.
You're not going to be one of the few, the proud.
They did. A funny story. They actually, the recruiter let me take his Lincoln LS to my senior prom. I had like mirrored tent and all this other stuff. And I was still partaking in certain activities. You're not supposed to be prior to the Marine Corps, and returned his car later that night. And he was just like, what the fuck? So yeah. Anyway, parents had to sign off because I was only 17.
Oh, okay.
Turned 18 in boot camp, and then went on my infantry track until, I got picked up to be a parade boy in DC for a year and a half.
So you were a Hollywood Marine. We talked about that before.
Yep.
So you're out in San Diego, recruit depot, infantry. You picked infantry. So you finished boot camp, but you got singled out. Why?
Because I was over 6 feet tall and we all looked alike.
And what did they have you do when they saw you be over 6 feet tall?
It was weird. We were actually out in the mountains of Pendleton, or the Highlands, if you want to call it whatever, and got pulled down, and they had you take off your shirt, and they looked at you, and it was a really weird endeavor. And I was actually, slated to get orders soon, and then me and another guy got revised orders to go to DC, and the order said 8th and I, which is an intersection, so I had no idea what that even was.
Yeah.
I didn't really have a whole history of the Marine Corps before I signed up. I literally didn't know anything about it. I was just like, oh, that sounds good. Let's do it. So did that for a while. It was terrible. I mean, in retrospect, it's cool, but during the time, it was absolutely terrible.
So you were training with M1s, or did you do the drill team, or you had to do the funerals?
So I did the funerals,
the national,
different engagements, Iwo Jima Memorial, Friday night parades, White House engagements, just a lot of different stuff. I didn't travel with the drill team or anything like that.
Oh, okay, gotcha. So, but the 18 months of you signed up initially for what, 4 or 5 years, or?
Initial contract, 4 years.
Yeah.
And I wasn't sure I was going to continue, because after that experience, let's just put it this way, in your first 4 years of the Marine Corps, until you hit non-commissioned officer, you get proficiency in conduct marks. Mine were not good.
Yeah.
I mean, I was just very disgruntled to be there. I didn't sign up for that.
Right. So it must have been some positive things at DC. Being a young Marine in DC on leave, was that a good thing or a bad thing?
Yeah. I mean, I found $1 beer night. Remember, I'm not 21. Right. So, found $1 beer nights, on Capitol Hill. At the time, I think in the area, the girl to guy ratio was 8 girls to every guy. So for a young, single Marine, it was a good spot. But our pay was so terrible that a lot of us went out and, we're moonlighting as bouncers out in DC. So I did that in Adams Morgan for my tenure there.
Yeah, I was a little bit older than you, but I was a bartender in M Street, and we didn't serve anybody over 21. It was, we had the guys from the Army, and then we had the Marines from 8th and I that come into M Street. Hennessy was the bar. And when I got out of college, that's what I was doing. I was a temporary paralegal during the day and bartender by night. But I'm very familiar with the scene there.
It didn't work for everybody, but fun fact, I've looked like this since I was 12. So it literally wasn't an issue.
Yeah. So you went and you were in DC for 18 months, and then you finished 8th and I, and then you went to Lejeune. You went back to the infantry unit.
Yep.
Where were we at then? Just give us some perspective. Were we at war, or were you gearing?
Yeah, I mean, it was the early to mid 2000s, pretty hot and heavy in Iraq. So, I joined the 6th Marine Regiment, and then pretty much out the door.
Yeah, and you had some idea. You mentioned about you when you're 8th and I that some of the infantry guys got pulled out 8th and I and got pulled into service and got beat up pretty good.
Yeah, so all the 8th and I Marines are typically 0311's infantrymen. So during that time, they were taking combat replacements for, basically backfilling units that needed additional bodies. And a couple of them that were in our platoon went out, came back, and, one of them was pretty significantly, injured.
Yeah.
When he left Bethesda, Walter Reed, wherever he was at, and actually came back to 8th and I mean, he had some pretty significant injuries. And in fact, unfortunately, I believe he was the only one left of his entire squad.
Oh, wow.
That survived. So yeah, it was very humbling knowing that before heading out the door.
Right. So you got to go to Lejeune, and then you head over to Iraq.
Correct. Well, I mean, there's some training.
Yeah. But at that point, you were just infantry, right?
Correct. That's when I officially started taking my career seriously. I started getting promoted, started taking on leadership roles, and then, which ultimately led to, what we're going to talk about in a little bit on my transition into the intelligence field.
So when did you become an NCO, I guess?
I want to say...
How many years in, I guess? How long did it take you?
3 years.
3 years? Okay.
3 or 4 years.
Okay.
Which, at the time, I would have never thought that would have been possible.
That's because of your affinity for Marine Corps, your performance, or you just...
Yeah, it was lack of maturity and, the lack of being able to handle authority figures very, very well and doing a job that I never wanted to do.
Right.
It was just ridiculous to me.
Yeah.
But when I actually got into the infantry, and infantry at the time was very hard to get promoted.
Mm-hmm.
I had very high proficiency conduct marks. I did very well on all of the prerequisites to get promoted. So then, I got promoted very, very fast.
Okay. All right. Where's your first, when you get to Iraq, where do you go? Where were you?
Well, I mean, there's different areas that we go to, but the one that's worthy of talking about is, during kind of the plus up of Ramadi, which is Anbar province. Anbar province is pretty much what, is known for, the Marine Corps. You have Fallujah, Baghdad, Ramadi. So Ramadi was a pretty hostile zone at the time. We actually took over Uday's palace, which is one of Saddam's sons. I don't remember the other son's name. His name is probably fucking Falafel or something.
Yeah, it'll come to me. Uday and
Falafel.
Yeah. Okay.
I get it. Yeah. I don't know. Both of them were sick fucks. I mean,
yeah.
But anyway, they blew up his palace or whatever, and his guest house, which was still a palace-sized place, was like the main operational center. And then, we kind of branched off from there.
Yeah. Now, were you a rifleman? Were you a machine gunner? What was your role in the fire team or the unit or platoon?
So in Iraq, I was a squad leader. So, as far as weapon systems, you have your traditional fire teams and squads, and everybody's assigned a position. But whether somebody actually takes that position, I mean, that's basically doctrine, that the traditional warfighting doctrine. Like, you're an assistant, you're a rifleman, you're a machine gunner, that kind of stuff. But in reality, when you're out on patrolling and stuff,
right,
it just depends.
Yeah.
Who is most proficient? If you can't hit fucking broadside of a barn with a saw,
right,
you're not carrying the saw.
Right. But did you have to huff an M62, or does that fade out before then, or just the saw? Or did
you just aged yourself?
Oh, really? Yes, a Rambo.
Yeah. I actually, one of the interesting weapons that I had is we had a weapons cache there that had an M79 thumper.
Oh, okay.
So it's a wood stock, single shot, 40 mic grenade launcher.
Yeah.
And we used to. This is just a funny story. Like, when we do escalation of force, like say a car is coming at you or something, and you want it to stop because, in Iraq, everything that explodes is just going to vaporize you. It's not like Afghanistan.
Right.
They would give you these pen flares to shoot at people, these little pens that shoot this little flare to tell people to, stop before you escalate. Yeah. I would put in a fucking flare into the M79 and like shoot it at cars.
Oh, really?
And sometimes I'd put in a what they call a white star parachute, so it's to provide illumination at night.
Yeah, nighttime.
But I would, shoot this thing at people, and then like it would hit the windshield, and the whole like parachute would like expand over their windshield, and they'd be like freaking out. And that's just sitting there burning. And this isn't, whoever's watching this isn't like war crimes. Or
No.
This is
just good, clean fun. Yeah, I get you.
Yeah, I mean, it was just. It is what it is, but the unit that I was with was very conservative at first, but then we kind of realized that if we don't kick it up a notch or 10, it could be bad. So it was a very interesting endeavor.
Was that adhering to doctrine, or was that thinking out of the box and putting your training kind of aside and adapting to the realities of Ramadi?
So what they call doctrine, what the Marine Corps I'm hearing is getting back to is traditional amphibious warfare, light infantry. Marine Corps was never meant to occupy cities like Baghdad or Ramadi or whatnot.
Yeah.
So a lot of the Middle East conflict in Southwest Asia was improvising, existing doctrine, learning new things, military operations in urban terrain. So the doctrine that we speak of that you train, what we call greenside training, is a foundational, type of training. But what you actually apply over in a situation like that, in close quarters combat, is completely different.
Yeah. So was the training adequate from stateside over? Were you feel like you were prepared, or you prepared after a while on the ground there that you went to adapt, adjust, overcome?
No. We're definitely trained very, very well.
Yeah.
I mean, it's apples and oranges. I mean,
yeah.
In a fictitious scenario versus the real thing is a completely different thing,
Yeah. And I don't know if it was Afghanistan or Iraq, but you mentioned that the aim on the other side wasn't all that good. It was a high quantity of fire, but not necessarily quality of fire.
Iraq was, they were better shooters. So we had, some guys that, the rumor was like a Chechnyan sniper. They had a lot more foreign fighters. So bodies that would come in to fight on their behalf of jihad from different areas that were very proficient in what they did.
Yeah.
They also had crazy things like vans that had anti-aircraft guns mounted in it, and
technicals, and
I mean, you'd get these reports and you're like, oh, that's wild, there's no way that's actually a thing, and then lo and behold, it's a thing.
Yeah.
So
you don't want to be on the receiving end of O4s or something like that. Yeah. So you started leadership, squad leadership, and then what happened? How long were you in Ramadi, and what was give us a one good war story here before we move on?
Let's see. So we were actually there scheduled. Marine deployments are usually anywhere from 8 to 9 months or something, 7 to 9 months. It's not usually a full year because we don't get that break where you go home and do the rest and refit and all that other stuff. But on our way out, we were actually basically scheduled to leave. That's when Bush did the push in Anbar of 25, I think it was 25,000 troops. So we basically maintained occupation of where we were at and basically did an entire another deployment. As far as war stories go, I mean, Iraq was just kind of a very fluid type thing, at nighttime. Well, kind of funny. So if you're not tracking on world history and like how Sunnis and Shiites like each other, they don't. Yeah. So every morning at our entry control point, the police army would show up. The army was Sunni, the police were Shiite, and they would like get at the end of our entry control point and just start beating the shit out of each other, sandals hitting each other in the face, and had to deal with that every day. But during Ramadan, actually, it was a pretty interesting endeavor because all attacks were like clockwork. You'd hear the imams come over the loudspeakers and it sounded like they were singing call to prayer, but it was actually them coordinating instructions to, ground forces. So a lot of that was very interesting, on basically a daily basis.
Now, I know you became proficient in language later, but Pashto you said, but that's obviously Afghanistan. But did you have a translator with you, or how did you guys interact with the public?
Yeah, no, we had translators and female searchers, during the day and whatnot if we needed it. But you pick up what you need to know, and depending on where you're at.
So you're in Iraq for how long?
All in all, probably in different occasions, couple years.
Okay,
yeah, a year and a half, something like that.
And then we get a chance to come home for a while. Or did you go? I guess you're at the end of your 4 years, obviously, right? Your first.
I actually re-enlisted in Iraq.
Okay.
So I actually came back and went to Quantico, Virginia, where I had the distinct honor to train snot-faced lieutenants through the basic school.
Oh, okay.
That was fun.
What was your role there? Did you
instructor? So
land nav or something? What were you doing?
Talk about land nav. Our company T-shirts were a dumbass-looking lieutenant on the back of it with a map hanging upside down, standing next to an I-95 sign. So we would give them their limits of where they could go, and basically before, like, I'll use land nav as an example. I would be like, "Hey, who here is a pilot or a lawyer? Raise your hand. All right, go play with yourselves in the woods because you guys are useless. You're guaranteed basically to move through. Right. Everybody else, you teach them these skills to be able to do terrain association, navigation, look at terrain models and, the contours of a map and be able to navigate even without the use of a compass or GPS or anything.
Right.
And these fools would get into positions where, at the end of the training, we'd have to drive around in a paddy wagon collecting lost lieutenants, and we'd have them inside the ammo supply point, which is completely enclosed in barbed wire. We have no idea how they got in there.
Right.
Smith Lake on Quantico, we had, they have these little boxes where you got to go like mark off where the checkpoint is. We had a lieutenant literally swim across the fucking lake because he didn't know how to do a 90-degree offset. Just a whole bunch of stupid stuff. So, and then my favorite were my peers that were a little bit older than me that had done, successful Iraq tours as an enlisted guy and decided that they wanted to go officer. Mm-hmm. Those were the best because anytime you do some type of training, remember this is doctrine training. This isn't what's currently going on in Iraq.
Right.
So it might not be applicable, but it's base level training.
Yeah.
We'd start, a course and a period of instruction, and you'd have some jackwagon, raise his arm and he's like, I was, a gunnery sergeant in the Marine Corps and I served, too. I'm like, thank you for your service. Mm-hmm. Now sit the fuck down because I don't care. Like none of this matters.
Right. But who were the most effective officers? Were the Mustang, the guys who came up through the ranks and were promoted, or that were prior enlisted? Did they have the best skills, or what?
It depends.
Yeah.
I mean, it depends if they're able to curtail their mentality of I used to be this and now I'm this. If they use it as like a credibility thing, so they can go back to the unit as a new officer and then gain the respect of not them being a brand new lieutenant, but them as a lieutenant with somebody with experience,
right?
Instead of like a 23-year-old that knows nothing about nothing.
Yeah.
But the time that I served, we were in a time where lieutenants typically, learn through fire hose because they go through their training and then they're instantly deployed, so they have credibility. It's not like peacetime where you get somebody that graduates, college, goes through OCS, through TBS or whatever it is, and then has no real world experience.
Right.
If they don't, they're going to get it pretty quick.
Well, we ended up with a lot of experience after 20 years of war. So it seemed like that's an advantage for the military that we have we have folks that are still in there that have on the ground experience, right?
This is at the height too of, this is always funny to me, and this is going to be completely cynical to probably anybody that's watching this, but so there's always been this huge thing, 22 vets a day, commit suicide, mental health awareness. Well, when I was stationed at Quantico, it was the highest densely populated amount of combat NCOs in the entire Marine Corps.
Yeah.
So we had our issues with domestic violence, suicide, all that other stuff. When you checked in, Sergeant Major would be like, hey, look, dickheads, if you take your bonus and go buy a brand new car and you have kids, bring it to me so I can immediately trash it with McDonald's so you don't go home and beat your spouse and then all this other stuff.
My head headed off.
But the story I wanted to get to is like, they're doing all these scans for traumatic brain injury, and like I remember they had all these iPads laid out and they had all of us in a room and they're like, if you're feeling sad, go grab a purple card, and like, we're all like, oh, fine, they ain't doing this, especially in front of our peers and like our, or whatever. So the way that they handled it in the beginning, they'd even have these civilians come in, and we called it Kumbaya Club. Yeah. And we even had a Marine put out this extravagant story that we're all kind of like, well, that doesn't sound like a real combat story. Yeah. And really getting the civilian into it, and oh, this is great, this is helping everybody. He's like, you're fucking retarded. I just made all that up, So it was a really interesting time, in my career, because you go from 180 miles an hour to zero. Yeah. You're with a whole bunch of people that also went 180 miles an hour to zero. And then,
kind of a unique environment. Have you seen anything like that? Were we better prepared as a result of that, or worse prepared, do you think, when you have somebody go that speed and then have to slow down and train?
I think that the majority of like my experience and most people that I've known took on the role that I did, and then the future role that I had, it was such a fast paced that the fanfare and the caring of returning stuff went away. Yeah. It was as simple as like, oh, you were just gone, and then now you're back, and then you're gone, and then you're back. The follow-up care, and to the defense of like the government and the VA and stuff, I mean, how do you take care of that many people? You just don't. Yeah. You're expendable. And I think the people that understand the gravity and the reality of the situation understand that. Right. Like, I'm not crying about it. A lot of veterans get all upset and they're like, I'm not being taken care of. Well, I mean, right. You signed up for it. What do you think was going to happen?
No, we talked about this with a previous podcast. We were talking a little bit about trauma and how terrible trauma is. Do you think some good comes from trauma when you run into people after the post trauma? Do you think it's always bad, or do you think there's some good that comes from people that have been exposed to trauma?
It depends on who they were before the trauma. Yeah. So even in something as simple as boot camp, if you see somebody, like, the whole point of boot camp is to break you down and build you up on a new foundation to what they want you to be, the image of the Marine Corps. Some people can't handle that. Maybe they were coddled their whole life, or they've never really had any type of real world exposure, and then they just remain broken. Yeah. Other people, see it as an opportunity to look at the world differently. Like, you take a candy bar for granted, but then, you spend 12 months somewhere in a shithole, living in a dirt hole with scorpions and rats and all kinds of stuff, and you start to care about the little things again. Like, the little things make more sense. Right. And then you understand that, life and death, for instance, are instant. You have no idea. I mean, it could be 5 minutes from now, it could be 50 years from now. Right.
But so did you experience some trauma? Obviously, if losing a friend or other stuff. Give us.
I mean, it goes without saying.
So, I mean, how did you recover from that? Did it, or did you?
I didn't. I'm fucking crazy, Neil.
No, I mean, I guess what I mean is, does it define you going forward? There's obviously a lesson learned there, right? I mean, and I see some people where they are exposed to trauma and they rebound, and it defines who they become, and I don't always, I say the adage is this shit happens for a reason. Most times it's good. It just takes a little time to figure it out. So do you have any scenarios where this experience that you had, at least in Iraq, and the bad that you experienced, turned you into a better person?
I'm not sure if it turned me into a better person or whatnot. It definitely gave me a sense of responsibility and leadership, and in a weird way, caring for others. But, me personally, it's one of those things that I think a lot of people that do a career, or they come from, like, even my grandfather, World War II generation, you take a lot of those experiences and you fold it up real neatly, and you put it away, because honestly, unless you were there and you experienced it, what relevance does it have to be brought to the forefront to talk to somebody about it? Right. Yeah. Because I mean, it's like you go to a bar, or I go back home after deployment and somebody's like, hey, did you fucking kill somebody? Or, you know, what's your job? I'd always be like, oh, I was just a clerk.
Yeah.
You know, I just did administrative
Don't
stuff.
want to talk about it.
And I would say something completely unassuming and uninteresting, just because like it's not worth it. What do you want me to say? You know, I say I got naked, put on a headband, and just went ham, just started smoking everybody. Like,
I'm not looking for that today, but no, I get it. All right, so
I did get naked a lot though.
So you get done with, I guess, Coin and then the Surge and Ramadi, and what happens next?
Well, so after the Quantico thing, well, actually during Iraq, I got approached by one of our HET guys. So it's no longer called HET; it's called Counterintelligence Human Intelligence Detachment (CHDs), or maybe it's not even called that anymore. But back then, it's called Human Exploitation Teams. Obviously, that's not too PC, but they're like, hey, you know, you seem like a solid guy. When you get back, do you want to do this? So obviously I didn't. I went to Quantico. But then when I came back to Lejeune, I think I told you this last time we talked, you know, I was much higher rank at that point, and I got back to the fleet, and I was now a platoon sergeant, and my peers, like the 3 other guys, were fucking idiots. You know, they're talking about like wrestling and like dumb shit, you know, and I was just like, I don't think that I'm better than them or more intelligent or smarter or anything like that. It was just like I didn't have anything in common anymore. Right. And I didn't have the same camaraderie, because I wasn't, you know, taping dudes up between mattresses and throwing them off the third balcony, or, you know, having a rumble royal, or just getting blackout wasted. Like, I mean, infantry Marines in the barracks are absolutely insane. Yeah. If you want to do a really cool podcast, interview people that duty non-commissioned officer on, you know, in barracks, it's wild. Yeah. So you evolved, and you said, hey, there's got to be more opportunity here. And so maybe something a little different. Yeah. Yeah. A little bit more using your head. I mean, you mentioned that infantry Marines are the smartest Marines out in the field, because they have to be. Yeah. Let me clarify. Definitely in the barracks. Yeah. Whoever's, you know, watching this or listening. I mean, if you were to ask them to solve cancer, or even, you know, do a simple math problem, might not be there. I mean, there's the whole Marines eat crayons and they're retarded and all this other stuff. I think we're allowed to say that word now in 2025. I think it's back. I heard that. Yeah. It's back. Yeah. But they're very, very proficient at their job. The Marine Corps ensures that they're very proficient at their job. Right. Not all of them are going to be going to MIT on their GI Bill. Right. Let's put it that way. Yeah. So you're in Quantico, and then you decide the HET. I went back to Lejeune first. Lejeune, okay, and then you got exposed to HET, and you got interested. Yep. So I went through the process of being boarded and, you know, accepted into that. Did a little bit of on-the-job training, went through a school, you know, in Virginia Beach area. That was quite extensive, and some more follow-on schools, and then it was basically back out the door again. And, you know, for a lot of guys that come over into this field, you know, it's a completely different endeavor from what they were doing before, especially if they were in like supply or motor transport, or because you don't have to be an infantry guy to go that career path. Right. For me, it was just like, I was still an infantry guy because that was what I was ingrained with, but I had extra responsibilities. Right. So you're talking about learning tradecraft, right? So yep, tradecraft, a whole bunch of, you know, different skills that fall under the purview of counterintelligence, human intelligence. Right. And so you kind of learn that soup to nuts and dam neck. How long does that take about? You know, I think the school is like 3 or 4 months, and then there's a whole bunch of other follow-on schools that you can go to get advanced level training for different things. Some SEER school for all that other stuff, which is a fun endeavor. Just a bunch of different things to get you prepared, and then you basically get attached to what we call victory units, which are infantry units. Yeah. In support of them, and then attend their trainings, and then deploy in support of them. Okay, getcha. Okay. So after Dam Neck, you deploy again. You start heading to Afghanistan. When do you go to Afghanistan? I think at this point we're looking at like 2010, 2010, 2011, something like that. So you've been in for about 8 years or so? Yeah. Okay. No, I mean, it was a very, very different experience, obviously, because, you know, instead of rank and file as an infantry guy, you're very much on your own program. Right. I mean, it's like a quasi relationship. Like you get, you know, if you're decent at what you do, you become very, you know, cozy with the company commanders that you support, and then kind of work directly with them, and then support the infantry guys as much as you can with what you do. Right. And so it was just a very different endeavor. I mean, I'm only responsible to myself, really, and then, you know, the translator that I had with me, who was a giant pain in the ass, but, you know, we became close. So do you have a specific
assignment? Are you looking for one person? Do you have sources out that are looking for information and feeding back to you? To give us some idea in the field, how you apply what you learned in Dam Neck and infantry into what you had to do in Afghanistan.
My job was to be the eyes and ears of the area of responsibility, and to do that through means that are not technical necessarily. So, you have like signals intelligence that's getting stuff through that. You have imagery, you have all kinds of different things that are technical. Mm-hmm. But what's always going to be missing from AI and all this other stuff that's coming out that's very technical, they're great, by the way, is the human element.
Yeah.
So a lot can be lost in translation. It could be cultural dynamics. It could be, the person's, what we call placement and access to information. So it's like the example I give is, say, you have a banker. Mm-hmm. The banker is his placement to the bank. His access is his access to the vault that has the money in it.
Yeah.
So I'm looking for people that have, a certain level of status that can give me information that I need to better protect the guys that I'm with, protect the civilian population, thwart threats, and then also neutralize any active threats.
So how do you know, and this applies to later, I guess, to one of those skills, but how do you know when someone's telling you the truth?
You vet them through different means, so you're always assessing their ability to be good at what they do through different types of stuff, whether they know it or not.
Right.
And then when they get to, when you can basically trust them and their information is verifiable, then, they become solid at what they do, and then you can start actioning things. The goal is always to develop your area to where you can basically walk in and be like, hey, Andy, like, let's go take care of this guy. Or like, this is happening right now. Let's go take care of it. That's the goal. Does it always happen that way? Obviously not, because, in a country like that, they're motivated by a whole bunch of different things. Mm. It could be a motivation that is deceptive. It could be motivation that's based on money. It could be whatever. But I always said this, that all the training that we do and all the stuff is based on somebody like you and I. Those people have like the average intellect of a third grader. I mean, if everybody that did what I did walked around with a backpack full of $5 million in it, I mean, we could have been out of there in no time, because they will sell their soul for anything.
Right.
So it was a very interesting dynamic.
Yeah. Well, IEDs are a big problem, right? So people that were producing IEDs or placing IEDs probably were a top priority for you. How did you have to deal with that?
Well,
from an intel's perspective, yeah.
It's just, if you've ever watched like the movies where they have like a web of strings and pictures on the walls and whatnot, it's kind of like identifying who's who in the zoo. I used that term last time.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily the bottom level or the mid-level guys that you're looking for. You're looking for that top dog that facilitates everything, but you work your way through all of it to get there. And does it mean necessarily picking off every single one to get to that? No. Mm-hmm. There's just different methods and means to be able to identify those things. And then, once you get a clear picture and an actionable picture, then you can take out, neutralize the threat, remove it from the area. And then you repeat the process, because it immediately, fills back in.
What area were you in Afghanistan?
I was in Helmand province. In different tours, different places, but, the most notable was around the Sangin area. It was an area called Nari Siraj, Hyderabad. It doesn't have the notoriety of Sangin. Sangin was like kind of the Baghdad or the Fallujah of Afghanistan, but nonetheless, it was an area that really had not seen a huge presence. It had a lot of British occupation, which the Brits had been known to go in there and be like, hey, you don't shoot us, we don't shoot at you. They just kind of sit tight. When we went in, it was more or less like a fresh landscape. So things evolved very, very quickly that weren't anticipated. It was originally thought to be maybe a, just kind of a holding position. At the time Obama was president, there wasn't really a mission set. Yeah. I think at one point we were protecting a fucking road. Like that was our mission set. Yeah. We were basically walking around like, what the hell are we doing here? Right. Which is the sentiment of a lot of people that, had gone to Afghanistan. But very quickly, we learned that basically all the fighters that were fighting in the Sangin area and all these other areas were living where we were at. So this was like their safe haven. This is where they went home at the close of business each day. Right. They didn't take kindly to us being there. So then it became very, intense very quickly. Yeah.
Well, was it a focus on them to have a war of attrition because they weren't going to win anything decisive? So was it just, let's say, 1,000 paper cuts? Was it that kind of thing where you have people get injured or, just constant malaise day in and day out? Or was it
from our end or for them?
No, just from the time there. How would you characterize the conflict?
I mean, in the beginning, it was more or less like, let's play the safe card. You know, the unit that I was supporting, it was a very different experience than I had in Iraq. Iraq is a balls to the wall, you know, nonstop. And here we had a battalion commander, I'm not going to name his name, but the story was that he'd been passed on promotion a couple times, so he wanted to play the safe card. Well, that didn't work where we were at.
Right.
And it took a couple months for that to register. And then finally we got to a point where we could start operating. And a lot of that came too because I was able to operate outside of where we were at.
Yeah.
You know, we had some other defense agencies that were, you know, I worked closely with that, you know, had a very different mission set and were a lot more liberal on what they were able to do. So it made a huge difference because if I couldn't get the answer I needed here, I'm just going to.
So, but the rules of engagement were a tough thing. You had to,
For the Marine Corps, yes.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. You mentioned last time too about the JAG knew you by your first name for sure.
Yeah. So, you know, in Afghanistan, when the poppy harvest comes in, they flood the fields to irrigate and to, you know, cross a click 1,000 meters of terrain and ankle or, you know, shin deep muck is tough. He wanted to go out to one of our observation posts one day for whatever reason. I mean, his uniform, his frog suit had never seen any dirt and looked like he still pressed them somehow. But so we decided to take him out, but we knew that there's a 99% chance we're going to get knocked out there. And we did. And he hid like a little bitch in a wadi for the entire time, never came back out again. Never bothered us.
Oh, really?
It turns out the story was that he was a former, you know, before his tour of duty, he was a prosecutor or something.
Oh,
shit
gotcha.
like that. So he was used to trying to fry Marines.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
Great dude.
Yeah. So did the rules of engagement change from the beginning to the end when it's part of the nation building? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was used to Iraq where it was shout, show, shove, shoot, you know, style, you know, pen flare, whatever, MS-79 thumper to, you know, Afghanistan where you'd be like on a patrol and you see a dude with spotting scope and a radio and all this other bullshit. And you're like, this guy's obviously watching us and obviously coordinating something. And, you know, you'd even have Afghans with you from the army that are listening to the Taliban, or I don't even want to call them Taliban. They were just JV fighters that were being controlled from elsewhere, talking about coming in and fighting and all this other stuff. And we're just like, what the hell, man? We're just going to let this happen. So unfortunately, it took casualties on our end to drive the point home to basically allow us to do what we needed to do. Then things rapidly changed. Yeah.
So it's iconic, but initially they talk about maybe the Green Berets. I know they're not Marines, but were on horseback and, you know, sighting in B-52 strikes, you know, that was like, the ROE was a little more aggressive in the beginning for sure. And then you turn it to this nation building phase and it's more restrictive, I guess. And at some point you said it changed. Is that like they tried to do some sort of counterinsurgency or they tried to do some sort of push like they did in Iraq or?
Counterinsurgency operations, you know, if you had a general sitting here, some flag officer or, you know, colonel that was, I mean, they'll tout how great it was and all this other stuff.
Yeah.
But I mean, counterinsurgency operations at the ground level it's almost like an oxymoron.
Yeah.
When I would talk to certain people that I would have detained, they're like, you know, we don't hate you, like, but you're here, so we're going to fight you.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, what the hell, you know, like okay. Or, you know, these Afghans show up to build a culvert to be able to cross this area. And, you know, the civil affairs guys are out there talking about how great they are. And, you know, the army, it's funny. I had one guy from civil affairs in the army that was like super down to earth. And he's like, you know, army's ridiculous. This dude, they get like bronze stars handed out to him like they're candy, you know, for nothing. He's like, it's so ridiculous. But, you know, one of my guys came in and he's like, and I'm like, what the fuck you doing here? He's like, hey, all those guys today, you know, are going to get killed when they leave here.
Yeah.
And so I went and told the civil affairs guy, you know, like, this is what's going to go on and you better have them finished today.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, that's exactly what happened. And I don't remember if it was this instance or another instance, another one of the sergeant civil affairs guys, after I told him there was a sniper in the tree line, he still went out there to talk to his guys and got shot through both legs. Like a moron. Yeah. I mean, the whole hearts and minds thing, I guess, but when you're in an area, you know, very austere environment like that, where they haven't seen, you know, they still live like Jesus was walking the earth, you know, there's zero infrastructure or anything like that. You're not going to convince them to cut down poppy and start growing saffron or rewind thousands of years of the way they live just because you said this is the better way of doing it.
Yeah.
They can't even string two sentences together.
They said they were, especially during Vietnam, it was hearts and minds. So we didn't really learn a lesson. We thought we could just nation build and do hearts and minds.
Yeah, that worked really well on the way that we left Afghanistan, right?
Yeah, I know. So, but it's not, that's a huge lesson that apparently, they didn't learn.
Yeah, let's win hearts and minds of the population, but then, hey, Taliban, you provide us security while we leave this country. Are you fucking kidding me?
Yeah.
So it's a huge, and I think a lot of the reason why we were still there too is what was very interesting on some of the bases. Like on my last tour, one of my duties was to, as we shut down bases, just kind of make sure there was nothing left behind that could be, classified or something.
Yeah.
Kind of one of the more boring details. But as we were shutting down stuff, we're trashing brand new equipment and all this other crazy stuff. They're on the bigger bases, they're building these huge incinerators just for the sake of building incinerators. And as soon as they build them, they take them down just to fulfill the contract. So the next fiscal year, they can get more money. They're building these barracks that nobody's ever going to live in. So it's all about this. I mean, do I think that we actually helped people? Absolutely.
Right.
Do I think that there was any real clear defined mission that was going to affect us here? No. Absolutely not.
No.
Fuck no.
Yeah. They rationalize it by saying, fight them here or fight them back home, And,
nobody from Helmand province is getting on a plane and coming over here and shit.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, if they do have a phone, they charge off the battery on their shitty tractor.
Yeah.
They live in dirt floors, and it was a very interesting time.
So how long were you in combat zone between Iraq and then Afghanistan?
Years. I mean, probably like almost half of my career. So, I mean, and if it wasn't there, it was something leading up to it.
Right.
I was gone a lot. Gone a lot of trainings, a lot of schools, a lot of everything.
Yeah, it used to be, we'll do a year in the war zone. I guess maybe that was a Vietnam thing, but so you spent a lot of time voluntarily, in an austere and violent environment. So
I wouldn't really call it volunteering. You're more voluntold than anything. I mean, if you're proficient at your job too, the reward that you get in the Marine Corps is you're going back.
Yeah.
So, and in the intelligence field that I specifically operated in, there isn't a ton of us. And it does have a, fairly high attrition rate.
Yeah.
So, and just like any other field, you're going to get your shitbirds that come into there too and, squeeze through the cracks and, make up shit or just do a terrible job at what they do.
Yeah.
Happens.
So how do you make this transition from warrior, and two separate war zones into sales, entrepreneur?
Fair question. So, post-Marine Corps, I worked for the government out of SOCOM, Special Operations Command in MacDill Air Force Base, Tampa, as a pretty much a project lead for a NATO contract for General Dynamics Information Technology. I hated every minute of it. I mean, it paid really well. And, I leveraged my graduate degree and my experience and all this other stuff to, I did really, really well as an analyst because I started off as an analyst. And my predecessor was like, I want you to come with me to this other contract. And as I put in my resignation, the actual person in charge of all of it's like, what do you want? And I was like, well, I want this ridiculous salary and I want this guy's position.
Yeah.
Never thought it would happen because I was much younger than everybody else got it. And then it just really turned into babysitting adults.
Right.
And I had nothing in common with any of them.
Right.
They were all mostly airmen or former Army or airmen that did some non-combat role.
Yeah.
So that got old pretty quick.
And you left, so you moved on. You resigned.
Yeah, I was going to go take a contract to do more counterintelligence work in Afghanistan, ironically. That paid extremely well, but then COVID hit. All visas stopped in and out, so I was kind of sitting in a holding pattern for a few months, and then I was like, I got to do something.
Right.
So randomly, I was just, my mom worked for State Farm for years, and I know what I do is in property and casualty, but I was like, the agent makes good money. So I looked at the health and life side, and I signed up with the company out of Sarasota, Florida. That's actually one of my competitors now. And it was just, if you've ever seen the movie Wolf of Wall Street,
yeah,
it was like that bullshit. A bunch of young kids snorting Adderall and like, have these like weird team meetings with like Chicago Bulls music and people like slapping hands and walking through and like, look at how much money. And, it equated to me like how many people I scammed this week.
Yeah.
Because the plans suck.
Right.
So
yeah,
I kind of felt dirty. And then I was like, I'm going to kind of give this up. And then, the brokerage that I fall under now reached out to me randomly because I think I threw my name on Indeed, and then that kind of writes the rest of it.
So then you started building the book, right? You got a book of business. And what's your focus now, and why? I guess you approach it professionally, ethically. You're not the Wolf of Wall Street anymore. How do you see success now? What drives success?
Well, that point right there is interesting, because in the insurance game, like, the first company I worked for is what they call a captive agent. So they get their commission, but they never actually own their business. They get paid by their company that they work for. Is an independent agent, is an independent broker. Every piece of business I write is tied to me. So obviously I want to write good business, because then if I don't, it's going to fall off the books, or it's going to, it's not going to keep paying me later on. So I just spaced out a little.
No. So I guess the products that you're offering now are several of them.
My niche. Like, how did I get into my niche? Okay. So a lot of agents will focus on like Medicare or the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, and both of those are a fucking nightmare. Right. So Medicare is terrible. I mean, it's incredibly confusing for seniors as well as us. I mean, plan A through Z and this and that and the other thing is extremely predatory, but paradoxically also highly regulated. So one of the reasons why I don't care for it is because I like to move fast.
Right.
And Medicare, unless you are solely focused on that, is a giant pain in the ass regulatory. Same thing with like Affordable Care Act. Mm-hmm. And what my focus being like self-employed individuals, gig economy, 1099 workers, small businesses, and even some larger businesses now, are not the demographic for like the Affordable Care Act. While I think the Affordable Care Act can be beneficial for some, for the majority of people I talk to, it's a nightmare. Like in our state of Virginia, for instance, like the Virginia marketplace offers garbage plans, and they're all HMOs or EPOs. And if you know what an HMO or an EPO is, it's basically a highly regulated plan. And if you leave, the state, or you got a kid that goes to school in another state, I mean, it's a useless plan.
Yeah.
So, I kind of made my focus on, those individuals that are that represent like the 20% of America that fall in the income bracket where they're basically paying for everybody else's health insurance. And I'm not dissing those that are making, less and they do honest work and all that other stuff, but for those that are paying, like I talk to people that are paying $3-4 grand a month for health insurance.
Right.
And it's fucking ridiculous.
Right.
And why? Because they have a good income. And I educate people on, the fact that you have a bronze HMO plan through the marketplace and you're paying $2 grand for it is because somebody else that has the bronze HMO plan is paying $0 for it. The price has got to be picked up somewhere.
Right.
And if they don't already know that, it's kind of like one of those shocking things. So then I kind of look at the private market. If they're the right candidate, there are certain plans out there that are very beneficial to them, or is, their entire company.
Yeah. So you focus on life and health, right?
Yep.
Okay. Not like your mom.
I mean, I went through a stint where I was really hot and heavy on life, but it's such a dog eat dog type thing. I mean, if you sell somebody a final expense burial policy or something like that, and then somebody else gets their information and they can save them $5, they'll cut your throat for it.
Right.
And health insurance is a need, where life insurance can be a need, but it's more of a want. Right. You want to make sure your health is covered first. And I tell people when I talk to them on the phone, like, the whole point of having this is to make sure you don't go belly up if something big happens.
Right.
Most people can swing a doctor's visit or urgent care or whatnot, but
so you recommend high deductibles, or what do you recommend?
It just depends on the situation. I mean, it depends on that person. They're, I don't claim to be a financial expert or a CPA, but I do understand how a lot of that stuff works and ties into their health coverage. I mean, if they have a solid nest egg and they can swing, an out-of-pocket max or a high deductible for something unlikely and big to happen, then that makes more sense, because annually they're paying less in premium.
Right.
But you'll talk to people that want to have the what ifs covered up front, then obviously they want a lower deductible.
Yeah. So who's your ideal customer?
Kind of what I said. I mean, anywhere from
small business
28 to 60 is kind of like my niche of what I'm going for.
Yeah. So somebody's on a Affordable Care Act plan or, cruddy HMO, they should call you and you could help them.
Yeah. I mean, I can definitely explore options for them too. And then there's a lot of people that they don't even have insurance because they're not aware that there are other options out there. So like when Obamacare got rolled out, there was a few options that were fairly good, but then the ones that are grandfathered into it, they're getting priced into oblivion until they, say uncle and then go to something else.
Right.
And then, but I will say that there are a tremendous amount of predatory plans too.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people are very fond of the ministry plans and the shared plans.
Yeah.
They're not regulated. It's in my mind, it's, a group of people that regulate a pot of money and then they decide on how claims go. And some of them are faith-based, some of them are not.
Right. But it's still about making money, and you got to be wary of that.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's no such thing as an insurance company that loses money. If they do, they don't exist.
But on your
Anymore.
main difference, though, from your first company, which was, in now, is that these are actually your customers. So you probably do a fair amount on referral business too. I mean,
I do.
Yeah.
I do a lot of, it gets to a point too where, because I also handle, a lot of the customer service too, because, I can also be a first line of defense before they sit on hold and routed to India for 2 hours on hold or whatever it is. I have a better connection to a direct line to get them an answer. So a lot of referral based. I also engage in like social media and different other things to get word out there and target those demographics.
Okay, so I know you were here, and I'm gonna not looking for a plug, but I'm just wondering, you're at Ring Spaces. How's that been for you?
Excellent.
Okay, good answer. Obviously, you're working from home, but you like the community here, you like the structure here, you like the coffee here. What, all the above?
I do. I mean, I think that it's a solid community. It's a very good location. I think, especially for those working in the gig economy or 1099 or maybe remote workers that, for me, it's a change of pace. Sometimes, being at home, I'll have that ADD moment where I'm like, I'm going to go mow the lawn, or I'm going to go do this, or I'm going to go do that. Here, it kind of forces you to, engage in that office setting that you might not get from a traditional, that you're lacking from not having a traditional corporate job or whatnot.
Yeah.
And this location's good too, because I mean, you can walk, grab a beer after work, get food.
Yeah.
You're right next to the train if you needed to commute.
Yeah.
No, it's good.
Yeah, great. Now, how's business now? Good?
Business is very good.
Okay, and people want to get a hold of you. How would they do that?
So, a couple different ways. I have a website, I have my phone number, I have my email. A lot of what I get right now is inbound stuff. So that it's online forms that they fill out that are automatically routed to me.
Right.
And existing customers. But, my email is zach@bluecollarhealthcare.com.
Okay.
And then, I would say that's probably the easiest way, to do it.
Okay, cool. Well, I appreciate you doing this round 2 for us. We got the camera on. We got the expert behind the camera. Thank you, Michaela. Thanks for coming in today. Thank you for your service. There you go. And if we want to do this again,
No problem.
come back. Maybe we need a third bite at the apple here, but I appreciate you doing it.
I'm gonna wear something a lot more revealing next time.
Sounds good. All right, we'll look forward to it. Thanks for coming in today.
No problem.
Thanks for tuning in to Neil on Business. If today's episode hit home, do me a favor. Leave a review, share it with a friend, and subscribe so you won't miss what's coming next. And if you're ready to lead with clarity, courage, and confidence, keep showing up. Until next time, stay sharp, stay focused, and keep building. Again, this is Neil Darling from Ring Spaces Studio, and this is Neil on Business. We'll see you next time.